Your Honor, the prosecution, I would like the right to cross-examine this witness. Bailiff, please arrest Mr. Cuthbert. I am holding him in contempt of court. Oh, wait. You didn't really think this through, did you? Instead of following his orders, the bailiff walks over to the judge's podium and whispers something into his ear. What? We have the nobles backing, in case you're wondering. I see, very well then. What are they saying? It appears that Miss Steelwind has somehow predicted that this would happen. In accordance with her wishes, Mr. Cuthbert may act as the prosecutor in her stead. What the hell? You can't be serious. I'm honestly just as surprised as you are, Miss Tamora. But Miss Steelwind has apparently designated him as her stand-in. It's unorthodox, but it's also legal. You recall something strange Steelwind asked you earlier today. So, what would you do if one of your clients was guilty? I suppose I'd withdraw and tell them to find another lawyer. And if no one else would represent them? I don't know. It would definitely be a hard choice for me. But I would never be able to represent them if I knew the truth. I just can't stand by and let a murderer escape justice. I see. Steelwind. Did she somehow know this would happen? Well, this isn't how I expected the trial to go. Shortly after you barge on the prosecutor's table, Celeste awkwardly followed behind you. Curiously, she only did so after the bailiff didn't arrest you. I guess we're really doing this. What's wrong? This feels weird. We're on the other side of the courtroom. I mean, this is where the prosecutor is supposed to stand. No, this feels way too jarring. Ruby, can we switch tables? What? Please ignore her. No, this is way too weird. Tyrion, get her to switch with us. Skilled Lord Celeste. I genuinely do not care. Cuthbert can have this side if he wants it so badly. With that out of the way, let's resume proceedings. Assuming that we're all at our preferred spots. We are, Your Honor. As much as you hate to admit it, you are more comfortable here. Not that you want to encourage her. With all these interruptions, I think it best to review the proceedings up till now. The prosecution proposed that Beatrice Frega's motive for the murder was to claim the victim's inheritance. However, the defense brought forth a witness who testified that Beatrice was disinherited by her father 5 years ago. Am I correct, Miss Tamora? You are, Your Honor. Very well, considering the circumstances, I think it's best to have Lady Frega repeat her testimony. Bailiff, please escort Lady Frega to the stand once more. Miss Frega, could you please give your testimony to the court once more? Of course. Sadness and fear. She knows the score, apparently. One day, we all woke up and discovered that Beatrice had fled from her home. She left a note for us, and in it she renounced her name and denounced my father. My father later called me and my sister into his study. He told us that he'd completely disowned Beatrice and removed any claim she had to the Frega estate. It was probably a threat to us in case we ever chose to go down the same path she did. He wanted to make an example out of her. But this all happened 5 years ago. So your father disinherited Beatrice shortly after her departure? Yes, he did. Sadness and fear. As such, Beatrice would have no motive to murder her father. Any inheritance she could have received would be long gone by the night of the murder. Is that really true, though? One day we all woke up and discovered that Beatrice had fled from our home. That must have been a surprise for all of you. Did she tell anyone else about her plan? No, she didn't. She left without a word to anyone. She should have spoken with us first. It appears that she's sincere about what she's saying. She left a note for us, and in it she renounced her name and denounced my father. From what I've heard about your father, I don't find that surprising. It's clear to everyone involved that my client was not treated well by her father. That's what drove her to sacrifice her claim to the Frega estate. My father had many responsibilities. He had much to consider. And that justified his treatment of your sister. Despite being her witness, Miss Tamora really isn't holding back against Miriam. My father later called me and my sister into his study. He told us they completely disowned Beatrice and removed any claim she had to the Frega estate. That seems like a drastic reaction to her simply leaving her home. My father and sister had already had many disagreements before this. He made it clear that he wouldn't tolerate her many acts of insubordination. I imagine that this was the last straw for him. While that sounds in character for him, would William Frege really do something so extreme? Regardless of his personal feelings, House Frege holds a lot of financial and political power. Would he really change his inheritance so haphazardly? It was probably a threat to us in case we ever chose to go down the same path she did. He wanted to make an example out of her. That must have been difficult for you and Leafy. It was. My father wanted everything to be his way, and anyone who didn't comply was punished. That's a terrible way to treat anyone, much less his own family. This all happened 5 years ago. If this happened shortly after Beatrice fled, you must have been less than 13 years old at the time. I can't imagine how that must have been. But can we really trust your testimony if you were only a child at the time? I remember it vividly, my father's words, the look on Leafy's face when she realized Beatrice was gone. I remember the way the sun was shining through the window that morning. It was all my fault. Anger and fear. I remember that moment with clarity. My father made sure of that. Sounds like a painful memory for her, and she seems to falsely blame herself for what happened. It'd be best not to press her more than necessary. You felt it while you were watching from the gallery. A part of her testimony doesn't match with what you'd learned from your investigation. It must have been something that Leafy told you. And they actually spoil it there. So if you want to go to the Leafy evidence... So we know about the adjustment to the will. Huh. I didn't actually notice at first that these were actually the exact same shape, just with a different drawing in the middle. Here we are. So... we have to talk about that. So I don't know which part I'm supposed to apply it to, 3 or 5.
Objection!
Sounds like 5. Miss Frege, it's clear that you're regretful of how your eldest sister was treated. But that guilt must have eaten at you for all these years. Cuthbert, I know you don't have a good history with the witness, but you shouldn't rub salt in her wounds. I was merely pointing out the witness's personal connection to the defendant, Miss Timora. She clearly regrets not standing up for her sister all those years ago. So perhaps she's trying to make up for that by lying to protect her. Excuse me? I did nothing of the sort. Miss Frege, you testify that your father disinherited Beatrice 5 years ago. However, I have testimony from another witness who spoke with the victim on the night of the murder. After Beatrice's meeting with William Frege, he openly declared that he would be removing her from his will. He even entered a study to draft a new will to reflect that decision. So that raises the following question. Why would the victim need to declare that he was disinheriting the defendant? It doesn't make sense if he had already disinherited her 5 years ago. Is that so? Well, who did you hear this from? Fear. It's clear they had no understanding of my father's estate. They had no understanding? Miriam, this testimony came directly from your sister, Leafy Frege. What? And she should also have been present during this alleged meeting 5 years ago. Well, she must be mistaken then.
Objection!
Your Honor, how can we trust second-hand testimony from a witness who isn't here? Wouldn't it make more sense to have Leafy give her testimony directly? I must agree with you, Miss Timora. Leafy Frege should be allowed to clear up this misunderstanding. She looks way too confident. What is she planning? You're not sure if it was intentional, but Miriam's testimony was false. Could she be lying to protect Beatrice? And if so, is Miss Timora expecting Leafy to do the same? Bailiff, please escort Leafy Frege to the stand. Miss Frege, when we spoke earlier, you mentioned that your father decided to disinherit Beatrice. And he decided this after their meeting on the night of the murder. Is that correct? Yes, I did say that. Fear. You see, Leify, Cuthbert doubts the testimony given by your younger sister. He seems to think that she's committed perjury. What? Fear. I wouldn't go so far as to say. Witness, the lying under oath is a serious crime. It would have harsh consequences even for someone of your sister's status. No, she couldn't have. Wonderful. Are you saying that you can corroborate your sister's testimony? Miss Timora, you can't just intimidate the witness. I have no idea what you're talking about, Cuthbert. I'm just telling the witness what may or may not have happened, depending on what she does next. The choice is ultimately hers. So, Leify, assuming Miriam wasn't lying under oath, could you please testify to the court to confirm what your sister said? Yes, of course. You see, Miriam was quite young when my father called us into his study 5 years ago. She didn't understand what he was really doing. My father would often lie to us. It was one of the many ways that he kept us in line. The encounter that Miriam described was just another one of his lies. Despite their disagreements, my father would never disinherit Beatrice without a good reason. He always held on to the possibility that she'd become desperate enough to return home. The truth is that none of us knew what my father was planning for House Frega's future, and we can disprove that easily. Ah, man, I gave it away for you guys again. Crap. Yeah, my off-the-cuff comments tend to burn me. See, Cuthbert, the truth is much more complicated. No one could have really known what William Frege was planning for his estate. Leify is definitely trying to cover for Miriam, and Miss Timora is playing her like a fiddle. Luckily for you, she's not the only person that gave her statement to you. And right there he gave away that, must be one of the other guys we spoke with. Emphasis on guy. You see, Miriam was quite young when my father called us into his study 5 years ago. She didn't understand what he was really doing. So you're saying that Miriam's testimony was based on a misunderstanding? Yes, my father was never direct with his actions. He always knew just what to say to plant seeds of doubt into people's minds. My father would often lie to us. It was one of the many ways that he kept us in line. I'm aware of how it sounds, but he had much to consider outside of his family. The Freges are one of the pillars of Wyvengard, after all. Keeping the family aligned with our house's goals was one of his responsibilities. Anger. It's clear that she doesn't agree with what she's saying. Is she in denial, or is she trying to keep the family name clean? The encounter that Miriam described was just another one of his lies. So you really think that your father would lie about something so important? It was of great importance, that's why he had to lie. He wanted to make Miriam understand the consequences of disobeying him. Anger and sadness? What kind of father does that? But if he truly wanted to scare Miriam, why wouldn't he disinherit Beatrice? Despite their disagreements, my father would never disinherit Beatrice without a good reason. He always held on to the possibility that she'd become desperate enough to return home. Even after she renounced her name and denounced him? My father was always more pragmatic than vengeful. I imagine that he expected her to fail on her own, and if she ever came back, she would be forced to rely on him. Anger. If he could make someone like Beatrice feel powerless, he could get the rest of us to fall into line. Looking back, I suppose that's all we ever were to him. Assets to be appraised and traded. You hear a bit of resentment in her voice. The truth is that none of us knew my father's plan for House Frege's future. If that were true, why would he tell you that he was disinheriting Beatrice? Perhaps it was a warning. I had my own share of disagreements with him, after all. Even now, I have no way of knowing if he was telling me the truth or not. That would depend on what Miss Timora and Beatrice discussed with Lord Frege. And right now, you still have no idea what they even talked about. Did William Frege really lie to them? From what we've heard, I honestly wouldn't put it past him. He clearly had very little respect for his daughters. But there were other people that he did respect. Right, was there anyone else that he would have told the truth to?
Objection!
Miss Frege, did you really have no idea about House Frege's future? No, I didn't. My father made sure of that. As I told you, he kept many secrets and wasn't above lying to manipulate us. But with Beatrice gone, you would have been the one who inherited your father's estate. Would you really be ignorant of your father's plans for House Frege? Unfortunately for you, I don't think you'd be that careless. In fact, I have it on good authority that you knew exactly how William's inheritance would be divided before that night. What? Leafy, according to Lloyd von Sanctus, you were arranged into a diplomatic marriage with his son. You expressed resistance to this arrangement, am I correct? I have no reason to comment on that matter. Cuthbert, the witness's personal matters are hardly of any of our business. Yes, I must ask that you keep this discussion relevant to the case. Your Honor, Leafy's resistance to this marriage is exactly how I know that her testimony is false. She was extremely averse to this marriage, and because of that, she made sure to know every detail about how it would affect her and her house. And that includes how House Frege would be inherited by her future husband. So that raises the question, Leafy. If you already knew the intricate details of this marriage, why would your father tell you that he was disinheriting your sister? That statement would only make sense if Beatrice was already in his will beforehand. That would render Miriam's testimony false and constitute a motive for the defendant.
Objection!
You present a decent argument, Cuthbert, but your claims rely on one assumption. And what assumption would that be, Miss Tymora? Even if he was lying, the victim declared that he was revoking Beatrice's inheritance. She must have already been named in the will previously, otherwise there would have been no need for him to say that. It wouldn't make any sense otherwise. And that's where your assumption is. You're assuming that William Frege was acting logically. What are you talking about? It's clear that William Frege was extremely controlling of his daughters. By your own admission, Leafy Frege was resistant to the marriage arranged by her father. In addition to that, a few months ago, Miriam Frege found herself wrapped in controversy regarding the Nightgrave trial. And finally, to make matters worse, Beatrice Frege, the prodigal child, finally returned and made a public appearance during the Lord's Ball. What are you trying to insinuate? In his eyes, William Frege's ability to keep his daughters in line was clearly weakening. He must have gotten desperate and made a grand declaration in a feeble attempt to scare you, Leafy. Even if that declaration was clearly inconsistent. But he wouldn't. Your ability to remember must be muddled by the shock of your father's death. His statement couldn't have possibly been true. If by some chance it were true, that would make you guilty of perjury. Or perhaps it was Miriam that was lying in her testimony. If your father's statement were true, the court might be inclined to investigate her for lying on the stand. Anger and fear? Miss Tymora, are you threatening her? As I said before, I am merely stating the facts. The witness is free to act as she sees fit. I'm just asking her to consider the potential consequences of what she says next. What do I do? Fear. Damn it. She's pressuring Leafy to side with her. She's clearly conflicted, though. Isn't there anything you can do? You feel a sense of clarity when you look at her. Is the Eye of Horus reacting to her stress? You wonder. I'm sorry, I need time to think. Please don't stare at me like that, Mr. Cuthbert. Wait a minute. No, wait! It's too late.
Naught can remain concealed.
You did it. You activated the Empowered Eye. There has to be something in her mind that you can use. The state of her father's inheritance is the backbone of your case. Is there anything in her mind that could definitively prove what was on his will? As much as I hate to admit it, this trial is a perfect opportunity to back out of the arranged marriage. Von Sanctus's holdings are weakening by the day. I doubt he'll be able to put up much resistance. And once Beatrice inherits the estate, we might be able to rebuild our family. She's assuming that Beatrice will inherit House Frege. That confidence must mean that she's certain of what was in William's will. But how do you prove that? My theory for everything is that they were trying to, Tymora and crew were trying to hijack one of the four houses, but we'll see what ends up coming of that. Father, I know we had our differences, but I did love you, and I never wanted you to die. She seemed genuinely surprised and regretful about his death. From your encounter earlier, you know that Beatrice had an accomplice, but you doubt that it was Leafy. What? this? That didn't evoke any useful thoughts. Aw, man, that's no fun. Why would Miriam say those things? Am I misremembering what happened? No, I would have remembered something like that. She must be trying to protect Beatrice. So Miriam's testimony was a conscious lie. Beatrice's inheritance wasn't revoked until the night of the murder. I should also point out, if you notice by how it's partitioning up, we can see there's 4 pieces. Ruby Timora, I've heard stories about her. I never expected Beatrice to hire someone like her. I wonder if she'll be at the will reading tomorrow. A will reading? She must be talking about William Frega's will. So yeah, that just seems a little random. I'm gonna cut out the ones where I was just throwing profiles at her to see what happens, but yeah. I don't know if you're supposed to figure that out from trial and error, or how. I believe you had enough time for deliberation, Mr. Cuthbert. Are you able to prove the defendant's motive or not? I'm not, Your Honor. At least not yet. It's clear we won't get anywhere until we can confirm the state of William Frega's will. And we can easily confirm that tomorrow morning, when William Frega's will is read to his family. How did you... I see. Once his will is read, it will become public record. I suppose I have no choice but to suspend this trial until such time that William Frega's will is read.
Objection!
This is ludicrous. The case against my client is completely outrageous. We've spent the entire court proceedings arguing if her motive even exists. The prosecution has very little evidence that physically implicates my client. Miss Timora, you clearly don't believe that the defendant had anything to do with the murder. Of course I don't. She's completely innocent. Well, if your client didn't murder the victim, who did? You sneaky little... Your Honor, with no other suspects, are you in a position to pass a verdict? No, I am not. Mr. Cuthbert is correct. The court does not have enough information to pass a verdict. Until the Inquisition has time to investigate these new developments, I will be suspending today's trial. We will resume the trial tomorrow afternoon. Court is adjourned. Well, that happened. Sorry, I kind of acted without thinking. But out of everything that happened today, I can't believe that Steelwind somehow knew you would do that. Right, that is strange. Did she seriously predict what I'd do off of that one conversation? Considering how things turned out, I suppose she was right on the mark. But that was still a big leap of faith. Anyways, we have some time to ourselves. I'd very much like to catch up on some sleep. Yeah, today's been exhausting, for a lot of reasons. And your work has only started. You still have no idea who Beatrice's accomplice was. The will reading was just an opportunity to stall for time. So the question remains, who really murdered William Frega? What the hell was that? Why is your son filling in for Arya? Listen, I have the situation under control. If that's true, I'd hate to see a situation you consider out of control. Iris? My father is not pleased with today's developments. You promised that the verdict would be passed before William Frega's will became public record. This has thrown quite the wrench in our plans. I understand. Cuthbert is just confused, but he's not a threat to us. We'd better hope you're right, Timora. Or else your poor ward might suffer the same fate as Prosecutor Steelwind. What? House Frega is too important of a prize for us to let go. Bring us results, Timora, or else we'll continue to take more drastic measures.